Okay, so very first thing they look at is they back up to graphing ordered pairs. And with these, you've got your XY axis. And the very first thing they kind of back up and actually talk about on this one is that when you have an ordered pair, remember that it's always going to be an XY form. And so anytime you're graphing an ordered pair, you're always going to get your side-to-side movement first, and then your Y is always going to be your up and down movement, your horizontal movement first, and then your vertical movement will be second. When they graph the points here, they're going to have you back up. Remember that this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and then quadrant 4. It goes in a counterclockwise motion. Don't know why, it just does. Okay, the only other thing that happens is if you graph a point and it lands on one of the lines that's here, you've got quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. The other option they'll give you on these is that if they ask you to graph an ordered pair or tell what quadrant it's in, if it lands on either the X or Y axis, that's an option that you get. So it could be 6 possible answers. It could be 1, 2, 3, or 4 for the quadrants. They'll also have that it could be on the X axis, and then they also have that it could be on the Y axis. So that's the first thing that you've got going here. So what they'll do is they'll just give you some points and say, all right, here's 3 points. Let's go back and graph them. So point A would be at -4, 3. B would be at 5, 0. And C, let's put it at 2, -1. Okay, and they should just ask you to graph those for those parts of it. So if we're graphing A, go -4, and again, so that's your x-axis. Negative will go this way, so go 4 to the left, and then 3 up, which would put you up in quadrant 2. 5, 0. So 5 on the x-axis goes 5 this way to the right. 0 means we don't go any up or down, so once you move 5 over, there's part B, so that one would be on the x-axis. And then 2, -1, 2 to the right, 1 down, so that would put you right here, point C, and again that would be in quadrant 4. So first few problems in section 1, that's it. They're just going to give you some graph problems and say, all right, here's some points, go back and plug it back in, tell me where it is. You might have to tell where it is, in quadrants, where it's going to wind up going from there. Okay, and then the next thing they do. Now, the second thing that they do, and it's really, if you know how to graph some of the different graphs that we're going to do, it's not that big a deal, but they mostly what they're having you do on the second part when you get to the homework is really more than anything else is just some evaluating numbers, plugging in numbers, working through the system, and just kind of knocking the rust off if you haven't done any math in a little while. Because the very first thing that, or after you've gone through this one, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to give you an equation. And for this one, they should give you specific points. If they tell you, all right, for this one, we're going to use X for -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And then after that part, they'll give you really a couple of, I think, 3 different options. They'll give you 3 different types of graphs that you could get. But it's really not so much worried about the graphs. It's more of just evaluating problems, plugging it in, and really working through the parts of it here. So it may be something like this. We're doing y is equal to x squared minus 2. Okay, and if you go through example on these, now this is what I'm not going to ask you to do on the test, because once we get to section, I think it's 3 and 4, then you start getting away from this and we'll start kind of going through the shortcuts. So this is more of just practice of just plugging this thing in and really just evaluating is really what it comes down to. That you're going to take whatever the x value is that you have here. So we're going to start with -2 and then plug that into the equation. And then at the end, we'll come back and write down what the order pair is. Okay, now the biggest thing on these, and this is something that I tell when I was teaching middle school, all the way through calculus, I tell people, let's do the little things that make things easier on yourself. Don't make things too hard. That if you have something like this and you're plugging in numbers and you're working through it, anytime you plug in a number and you're not really sure exactly about what's going on, because this one we're going to plug in -2, put that number in parentheses. And if you do that, 90% of the questions that you have about a problem should be answered, because some people are like, what do I do with a negative? Well, okay, put it in parentheses first. I'm like, well, it's -2 squared, right? So it's -2 times -2. What's a negative times a negative? Well, it's positive. So that's just a regular 4. 4 minus 2 is 2. So I'm like, okay, you don't have to worry about the negative. Put it in parentheses and do the basic 7th, 8th grade math that you know how to do, and then go from there. Okay, do the same thing with -1. Take the -1, plug it in, and again, put it in parentheses. So -1 squared, same thing. It's negative times negative, so that's positive. 1 minus 2 is -1. And we'll plug in 0. 0 squared is 0. 0 minus 2 would be -2. Plug in the 1. Again, anytime you're plugging in numbers, I would say leave it in parentheses, even if it's really obvious as to what the answer is. So it's 1 minus 2, which is also -1. And then one more here. Let's put in the -2. Sorry, positive 2. Two squared is 4. 4 minus 2 is 2. Okay, so we had 5 numbers to plug in. You plug in the 5 numbers to get you 5 ordered pairs. And then what they're going to ask you to do then is take those 5 ordered pairs and graph those ordered pairs. Okay, so the point -2, 2 would be here. -1, -1 is here. 0, -2 is here. 1, -1 is here. And then 2, 2 would be here. Okay, and for those, and right now they're not, I don't think they're really even asking you to connect the dots. They're just having you go back and graph some points. Just so that, and again, it's 2 parts. Number one, the big thing they want you to do is just to practice this part back here of just doing order of operations, just remembering everything that was going through. Second thing is, okay, just go back and just kind of plot some points, make sure you got the basic shape of it. What would be good, and where they're going with this one, is that once we know the shortcut to some of these, you actually don't, on online homework, you don't actually have to graph these, because if you will, once you know the basic shape of x squared, it's going to go back, and once you put a couple of dots on here, it's going to do everything for you. You don't actually have to connect the dots. You just click on the shape, and it puts everything in there for you. So if we're doing this one, if we do paper pencil on this one, what I'm going to ask you to do is just give me a couple of, I'm not going to ask you for 14 points. I'm going to give you, say, all right, give me 2 good points that's on here, and then just give me a rough sketch on the rest of it so that I can just tell that you know what we're doing on this thing. I'm not going to ask you to graph 5 or 6 or 7 points. Give me the most important point that's on there. Give me one other point where I can at least tell that you've got the basic shape of it. We're good to go. Because we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to ask you for 18,000 details. Give me the big picture. You got it. Okay, we're good. Let's keep on going. So, we've got other things we've got to worry about. So if we're doing graphs, I'm not going to ask for every single little detail on it. Give me the big picture. Give me the basic shape. All right, we're good to go. So now, online homework, it'll be a little bit easier because when you set these up, they'll give you options and it speeds it up. And that's the part that takes a little bit to get used to, just so you can kind of get the feel for what it's going to do when we're going through those. Okay, now let me give you one more, and we're not going to graph this one, but just to give you a couple of other problems that you may run into. That you may get some absolute values, and sometimes people forget exactly how they go through with absolute value. So let's just do a quick one on this one, and we're just going to plug in 3 different numbers. Maybe we'll do like -4, 0, and then 10. Okay, biggest thing with absolute value is when you're plugging in numbers is that the absolute value is pretty much like a parentheses. That you do everything you can do inside the parentheses, and then once you're done with that, then if the answer is not positive, then you make it positive. But you've got to get to the end of it to kind of go through that one. So if we've got, x value, if we start with -4, you've got -4 minus 3. So again, sometimes people forget exactly what they're doing. But again, the absolute value symbols, just treat that like it's a set of parentheses. -4 minus 3 is -7. Once you've got it down to a number, then if that number is positive, it's okay. If it's not positive, then you just make it positive. Question?
So the vertical bars are the symbol for absolute value?
Yeah, those basically, that's your, if you want to look at it that way. That's your symbols for absolute value. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and hopefully it'll stand out when you're seeing those, when you're working through everything. Okay, and then order pair at the end, that would put you at -4, -7. Oh, sorry, +7. Yeah. Fix that real quick. Okay, next number we have is 0. Okay, so we've got 0 minus 3, and again, just treat that like it's in parentheses, so 0 minus 3 is -3. And again, the absolute value of -3 is just 3. So order pairwise, that would be 0, 3. And absolute value, really what it is, that's just, it's distance. They don't care which way it is, so it's just how far is it? It's 3 feet. You're never going to have a -3 feet answer. You don't dig a hole 3 feet backwards into the ground. It's just a hole. It's already in the ground, so it's just... So when they're talking absolute value, they want the answer to be a positive because we're talking about distance. Okay, and then the last number we got there is 10. Well, 10 minus 3 is 7. And if the number is already positive, it doesn't do anything because it's already positive, so in that case, the answer would just be 7. So order pairwise, that would be 10, 7. Again, you take those points, go back and plot them on the graph, and you get what you're going to do with it. And again, the biggest thing on that one is it's just practice of plotting the points. You don't really, to me, they shouldn't be asking you to connect the dots yet because we'll talk about the basic shapes of things, actually section 5 and 6, I think. When we talk about the basic shapes and the shortcuts we get to do when we're talking about how to do the graphs so that you don't have to make a table and plot 6 different points, you get to know the shortcut of, oh, I just do this, and I graph it, and I'm good. That comes a bit later, so this is more than anything else, that's just order of operations. One other thing that pops up, and this is usually if there's one problem that throws people off. Let's do -3, and then let's let x be like 6, just to throw out 2 numbers there. Because this is the one that sometimes, especially if you're not good about going back and put parentheses around numbers, this is the one that gets people most of the time. Because this is the one they look at and they go, oh, especially if they were doing 6 first, they go back and they put it in here and they go with that, and then they'll say, do I do the negative first or do I do the exponent first? Here's why putting the parentheses around it is a big help. Because if you're plugging in 6, that's crooked. There we go. If you know that x is 6, if you don't put the parentheses around it, sometimes people go, what do I do there? So if you put the negative, whatever the number is that we're going to do here, if you put that number in parentheses, everything else that you do to that number has to be on the outside. So it's the negative of x squared. The negative has got to be on the outside. The squared's got to be on the outside. So then it comes back, okay, so what am I going to do now? Are you going to do multiply times -1, or are you going to do the exponent first? You're going to do the exponents, right? If you go back through order of operations, you do your parentheses first, you get your exponents, then you multiply or divide, then you add or subtract. So before you do multiplying by the negative, you've got to do the negative, or do the exponents first. So it's really the negative of 6 squared, which is 36. Then put those two numbers together to get -40. Okay, and then the one that really gets people is that -3. Because we've got y equals, and again, it's the same thing. If you will put that number in parentheses, it takes care. Sometimes people that don't put it in parentheses, they'll put the minus negative, and they'll go, oh, that's positive. Well, okay, it is, but it's not the way you do it the right way. It's not a positive, because you've got a -3 squared, which is 9, and again, that negative is just going to hang out in front of it there. So then it's -9 minus 4, that's going to make it -13. And so, and sometimes when we do enough of these, people eventually will go, oh, well, anytime that's a negative x squared, that first number is always going to be negative. I'm like, yes, every single time, because you're going to do this first, and then you're going to make the answer negative, because it's -1 times x squared. Well, if you square a number, it's always going to make it positive, and if you do a positive times a negative, it's going to be a negative. So, it's those little things that, if you'll get in the habit of doing some little things, it makes the work easier as you go back and start going through these. Okay, so there's some different parts that they give to you. Again, it's order of operations, and it's just plotting some points on the graph. And then the last couple of things we get here are x-intercepts and y-intercepts. Actually, it's right up against the page here. Let me just start on another page. I have had a little bit of practice. Okay, so x-intercepts. This is where the graph crosses the x-axis. And this may be 1 point, this might be 2 points, it could be 3. It depends on the graph and where it is. So if you look at it, you can see it's crossing the x-axis. There's 1, 2, 3 points, whatever it is. To find it, because sometimes they're going to give you an equation and ask you to find out what it is without looking at the graph. So to find the x-intercept, I'm going to change colors. So if you have to find the x-intercept or x-intercepts, depending on what the problem is, then you're going to do one thing kind of like what we were just doing. You're going to plug in y equals 0. So when we were plugging in, a minute ago, they gave us the equation, and they said, okay, here's the numbers we want you to plug in. Well, if they give an equation, say, and they ask you to find out what the x-intercept is, then they're not going to tell you what the number is. You just have to know, okay, to find the x-intercept, I'm going to take y equals 0, plug it into the equation, and then work this thing out. Okay. The y-intercept is the same thing. It's just in reverse. This is going to be where the graph crosses the y-axis. And every single point that's on the y-axis, which is finding your y-intercepts, they all have the same thing in common, and it's just the opposite of this one, is that to find the y-intercept, again, because it's intercepts. It may be 1, it might be 2. I don't know if they quite go to 3. But if they ask you to find the y-intercept or the y-intercept, whatever it is, you're going to plug in x equals 0. Okay, and for this section, if they give you an equation, it should be a really simple equation of, okay, here it is, I plug in the number, I work it out and solve it, and it's really easy solving to get there, you got the answer. As we get farther into the chapter, it gets a little tougher because you have to do more than just add and subtract. You're going to start doing some square roots and, all these different things you've got to do. You've got to do some factoring to go back and find out where those x and y intercepts are when they give you equation-wise. But in the beginning, it should be pretty straightforward. Just to kind of give you an idea what this thing would look like. Well, I can tell you right now. 1.1 we're going to. There's 10 in section 1. 17 in 2. And 10 in section 3. Because 2's got a little bit more material than what 1 and 2 got. And again, sometimes you get short questions. The homework in section 1 should go really fast because it's just plotting points, doing a little bit of evaluating, and then you get a couple of questions at the end where it's something like this, and it's going to ask you to, and I don't know that I'll be able to do it justice because I'm just going to have to freehand it here. But they'll give you a problem like this, and they'll ask you, okay, tell me what the x-intercept is, tell me what the y-intercept is, and pretty much that's about it. They'll give you a couple of graphs and just say, okay, here's a graph. Tell me what the x and y intercepts are. If there's not anything, then say that there's not anything. And for this one, I'd have to, online homework, you can kind of go back in and investigate because you have some grid lines here. But this one should be more like this. Something like that. So that you've got some marks that you can go back and see. So the first point you've got here, this would basically be at 3, 0. And because that's hitting your x-axis, that's going to be an x-intercept. Yep, right there. Wherever it touches, intersects, whatever you want to call it there, but wherever it touches that x-axis, that's the point you're looking for. Yeah. Where it touches the line, yeah. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's going to be at -8, 0. And they should, now sometimes they may let you just put x equals 3 for the x-intercept. They'll flip-flop back and forth. Sometimes x equals 3 is okay. And sometimes they want the order pair. They'll tell you what they want, because most of the time they'll probably say write it as an order pair. That way you know that you're doing that. But sometimes they may also let you just put a number where this one's at 3, this one's at -8. So they kind of flip-flop back and forth. And then y-intercept, well, that was going to be up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So that one we didn't go any side to side and went up to 6, so that would be 0, 6. Okay. So that's, and again, that's all they're trying to get you to think about right now is that the X and Y intercept is where the line crosses or intersects, touches the X-axis, where it touches the Y-axis. And again, you could have a line that maybe, they may give you a graph that may look something like this over on the side. Doesn't touch the X-axis. It might touch the Y-axis, but we can't see it. So one like that, you just have to say, there's none. There's no X-intercept and there's no Y-intercept. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever you can see, that's all you can go with. You can't, it may go on forever out here, but you've only got this small window, so if it's something like that, then there's none. And they should give you an option for there is none. Doesn't exist, no solution, that kind of thing.